has friends named Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And Lazarus is sick. And they send word to Jesus, your friend Lazarus is sick. And he responds in a very unique way. He says, okay, I'll stay here for another couple days. His death isn't going to be a big deal. He's okay, it's not going to lead to death. And Lazarus dies. And Jesus shows up. And Martha comes out to meet him. Mary stays at home, grieving with her friends and friends from Jerusalem. They were influential people. 6 miles away was Jerusalem. They're in Bethany. And Mary puts it to Jesus. Martha puts it to Jesus. If only you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And he says, do you believe who I am? She says, yes, I know you're the Messiah. I know you're the promised one. That's why it's so upsetting. And he says, your brother will live again. And when she said that, she goes, I know that. At the last day, he'll rise. How many of you know that at the last day of history, or at the last day of earthly future, we're going to rise? Jesus is going to call us, and we're going to go back, we're going to go to heaven and live eternally. Verse 25, Jesus says to her, I am the resurrection and the life. No one who believes in me, the one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. And he says, do you believe this? And she says, yes, Lord, I believe. I believe you're the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come to the world. After she said this, she went back and called to her sister Mary. Now see, last week when we left off, John 11, verse 27. That was where we left off. And Jesus hadn't done anything yet. Lazarus is dead. He's not giving them morning comfort. He's saying, it's okay. And at first, it sounds a little hard. See, we've had 2,000 years to see the story. But as it's happening, can you imagine how they must feel? We know you're the Messiah. We know, but our brother's still in the grave. He's still dead. She goes and she gets Mary, and she pulls Mary aside from the crowd that's at her house, helping her mourn. By the way, in the Jewish tradition, everybody came into the house, and it was days/weeks before they would leave. In fact, we hear about Job way back in the Old Testament, and we hear his friends, and we think, oh boy, his friends didn't do him any good, because they started, but for the first 7 days, they just sat with him. For 7 days, all they did was sit with him and take care of him. Didn't say a word. I want you to understand, that's the tradition. So here's what happened. After she said this, she went back and said to her sister Mary, the teacher is here, and he's asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now, Jesus hadn't even come into the city yet. Jesus was not in their house. He was not at their door. He's at the edge of the city. And he was still at the place where Martha had met him. That's significant, believe it or not. Because here's what I want you to understand. That story, the story of the prodigal son, the father, and in this case Jesus, stayed at the place where he had encountered Martha. Does that make sense? If he had gone somewhere else, where would they have found him? Think about it for a minute. If we walk away from our relationship with Christ, Christ doesn't go searching all over for us. He stays there so that you know where to come back. And you have to come back to where you've been. And he waits for you. He doesn't say, I waited 10 minutes, I'm done. And it's not like college. If it's a full professor, you got to wait 15 minutes. If it's an associate professor, you wait 10. And boy, at minute 11, everybody's walking out the door. No. Jesus is waiting. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her. So here's the picture. Jesus is standing on the outskirts of town. Martha has come back and said, Mary, Jesus wants to talk to you. Mary gets up and goes. The people who are mourning with her all of a sudden are going, wait a minute, she's gone. Yes, I bet you I know it. How many of you have ever done that? I know where they're headed. And in this case, guess where most people thought she was headed? To the graveside. Why? Because that would be the natural thing to do. Jesus lived in the natural world that we live in. Somebody gets up and they've just lost somebody and they go rushing out, and we're sitting there with them, and all of a sudden they're gone. Well, our first thought isn't, hey, they went to McDonald's. It's, hey, they went to where the mourning is happening. They followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. Verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was, she saw him. She fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Now I want you to think, I'm sure there was sadness in that. I can't fake sadness, so I'm sorry, I'm not a good imitator. I can't pull that out. I also think that there was a little bit of anger there. If only you had showed up, my brother wouldn't be dead. See, many people have gone through things where family members, family friends, they've died, and we say, hey, God, why? They were too young. They were too this. They were too that. I see it on the news every time. See, if you listen to the news, no bad person ever dies. They were a good boy. They were loved by their family. Yeah, they were. And I'm not trying to be negligent to those people. I think the hardest one I ever heard was a guy at 89 years old passed, and they said, he died too young. Now those of us who are getting closer to 89, we said, yeah, he's right. I remember when I was a teenager, or when I was Jake's age, and somebody died, and they said they were 55, and I'm, wow, that's old. But Jesus comes through, and Mary says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her crying, her emotional release, and the Jews had also caught up to her by that time, and they were crying, he was deeply moved in his spirit. And he was also troubled. I want you to see this because Jesus is 100% God. Let's make that clear. Jesus is also 100% man. I want to make that clear. In his spirit, as God, he was sitting there going, I could have done more. How many of us could think we could have done more? See, Jesus took that, both his spiritual and his physical, and he went, oh man. And he was troubled in his spirit. And he was also troubled in his personhood. And he says,
Stop it, John.
Where have you laid him? Yeah, you can get rid of him.
All right.
Thank you.
Take the world.
For those of you who are on the internet, we just got rid of
It was on the screen.
We just got rid of one Red Lantern flag. So he asked Mary, where did you lay Lazarus? Where is he at? And her answer is, come and see. Come and see. You weren't there when he was buried, so now I'll lead you. And then we read the shortest verse in the Bible. We read the verse that every 10-year-old memorizes first. Because it's 2 words. Jesus wept. Jesus' heart was broken because his friend is dead. Jesus' heart was broken because his friends are telling him the truth. You could have kept him alive. And the Jews see Jesus crying, and they say, see how he loved his friend? See how much he cared. By the way, in the Jewish tradition, they had professional criers. They had people who get paid to show tears. Now there's a job for you.
Not you.
Not me, I don't cry, but not hardly anyway. But man, it's a good job. And here's what they do. They actually come with little vials. Kind of like that. That's not for crying, okay? Maybe a little bigger than that. And what they do is, they weigh it at the beginning of, before they start, and they weigh it when it's over, and they get paid by the gram or whatever. I don't know the measurement. But they get paid by how many tears they put in there. So every time a tear drops, they take the lid off and catch it. That's not a joke. That's serious. Because what happens is, the world, the culture that Jesus is living in, judges how well you were loved by how many tears are shed. And Jesus still hasn't done anything except cry. See, this whole human drama is playing out. Martha and Mary and their friends are showing their sadness, and Jesus cries because he feels their pain. He also feels a little bit of, maybe I shouldn't have hung out for 2 days. Maybe I shouldn't have finished what I was doing. But he's God and he knows. But remember, he still aches like we do. Verse 37, but some of them said, could he not open the eyes of the blind man? Could he have kept this guy from dying? See, in our humanity, we look for a reason. And if Jesus could heal a blind man, why didn't he keep this guy from dying? Why? Because death's permanent. Now remember, last week we talked about the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Pharisees believe that there's an afterlife. The Sadducees believe there's only one, YOLO. Okay? Martha was a Pharisee. She believed that at the resurrection, her brother would be back. We are Pharisees. We believe that there's an eternal life. We don't believe that when you're done, dead, you're done. Verse 38. Jesus, again at the graveside, is deeply moved as he came to the tomb. As he comes to the tomb and it sees it, he recognizes that from a worldly viewpoint, it's over. Think about it for a minute. When you're standing in front of that, I'm going to go there. My wife's eyebrows just went way high. When I say I'm going there, it's a scary thing. As a pastor, I've done a lot of funerals. And different areas do feel differently about funerals. One area that I pastored in, they would not let the families be in the room when the lid closed. Because it's too final. That's when the reality sets in. Another area I pastored, they would not let the family see the casket go into the ground. Because in that area, it's too personal. In Jewish funerals, everybody takes a handful of dirt and throws it on. It's a cultural difference. A shovelful gets thrown on by every person who's there. I was at one funeral where this one family just wouldn't leave. And wouldn't leave. And they tried to be nice and let the family linger, and finally it was getting to be almost sunset, and the The guy who had the tractor, who was going to push the dirt in, comes at me and says, Pastor, my wife just called. We're having steak. I really need to go home. Can you move these people along? They're just hanging out, and we don't put the dirt on. So I politely tried to go up to the family and say, hey guys, he's got some other stuff he's got to do. Is it okay? Can we move on? Oh, no, we're staying. In fact, give us a shovel. They actually help fill it in. It's a cultural difference. But Jesus is standing in front of the tomb. It's been 4 days. The tomb has a stone in front of it. They don't embalm. They only put spices on the body to keep it from stinking so bad. And Jesus says, take the stone away. See, that stone is the only thing protecting Lazarus' body from the critters who would come in and enjoy dinner. I know that's crude, but it is. It's also the only thing keeping the smell of decomposing human inside that area. And Martha's here now. And she says, but Lord, she's the one who first said, if you had only been here, he wouldn't have died. And now he says, open the stone. And she goes, but Lord, and I like the King James Version. Okay? I know this is NIV, but I'll read the NIV, then I'll tell you how it says it in King James. In the NIV it says, but Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been in there 4 days. In King James it said, but Lord, he's been in there for 4 days. He stinketh. It's just a difference in translation. But think about it. I mean, as a kid, you get this picture. He stinketh. Verse 40. Then Jesus said, Martha, didn't I tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? Didn't I tell you just a few minutes ago that your brother would be seen again? And at first, I'm sure she thought, yeah, and I told you, at the resurrection. So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up to his Father. I want you to understand, when we pray, we teach kids how to pray. We teach them, fold your hands, bow your head, close your eyes. How many were taught that? Do you know why? Because if you bow your head, then you can't see all the stuff that's going on to be a distraction. And if you close your eyes, it's to focus you on God. But when those prayers get long, now, we're being honest here, when those prayers get long, how many of them ever peaked? I have. None of you ever peaked during prayer? Oh, okay, I'm glad a couple of people did. I hate to think I was the only one. But the other reason is if you have your head bowed and you have your eyes closed, even if you open your eyes, you can't see what everybody else is doing because you're looking down at your feet. And you fold your hands, and there's a very practical reason for folding your hands. Because if there's more than one kid near you, you're not poking them. It's hard to poke them this way. Easy to go like this. When Jesus prayed, he went a different way. He went this way. See, he raised his hands to his Father. He looked straight up to heaven because he could see his Father. Our Father. Because as Christians, he's our dad too. And he prayed to heaven. And he looked up at God and he said, Father, I thank you that you have already heard me. Thank you, you've heard me. He hasn't said anything. But he was in a constant state of communion and conversation with God. And God hears the Christian's prayer. I knew that you always hear me. I knew it. I knew you were listening to me before my mouth opened. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here. See, do you ever think about what you do when you pray? Some people only pray in private, and that's cool. Some people won't pray in public. That's fine. But when I'm praying to God and I'm by myself, I'm sitting in my car driving and I'm talking to God, it has no vision of what prayer here looks like. I don't fold my hands because I'm driving. I don't bow my head. I don't close my eyes because that would be unsafe. God and I talk like I'm talking to you right now. And I wait for his answer just like if you were talking to me and I was talking to you in a conversation. But in this case, Jesus is praying to his Father and he's saying, God, I know you already heard this, and I'm only saying this out loud because I want them to know that you're listening. I tell people a lot of times, when I pray in public, like before this message started, when we prayed, that wasn't as intimate as I pray with God. I talk to God and I let you guys listen. And I'm okay with that. But understand, when we're talking to God, it should be intimate. But if people hear us, they should hear the love, they should hear the common connection, they should hear the ease of conversation. It shouldn't be hard and stuttery, even though sometimes our emotion takes over, and it does. I knew you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they can believe that you in fact sent me. See, there were over 200 prophets claiming to be Messiah during this time. Jesus wasn't the only one saying Messiah. Jesus wasn't the only one doing special things. Some by chicanery and trickery, some by, Jesus by God. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice. He said, Lazarus, come on out. Kind of like a TV show. Come on down. Do you know why he called Lazarus come out?
Everybody else went out.
Because if he just said come out, that entire cemetery would be empty. Probably not the message Jesus wanted for that moment. So Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out. His hands and his feet wrapped in strips of linen and a cloth around his face. They put a cloth over his face and then tied it around because as your joints loosen up, your jaw slaps. If you've seen any horror movies, you know that, right? But I want you to see what Lazarus kind of looked like. His arms and his legs are wrapped, and he's coming out. Okay? He's doing the shuffle. And he shuffles out. And in the days before Hollywood and horror movies, and in the days before streaming horror movies, that would scare the daylights out of most people. Mm-hmm. And he can't talk. Why? Because there's a thing wrapped around his jaw, holding it up. Kind of like Marley at the beginning of A Christmas Carol. Pastor, why do you use these things? Because I want us to realize the human condition hasn't changed. I want us to realize that some of this stuff is a bit scary and a bit odd and a bit different. And I also want you to know that Hollywood tries to imitate reality. Jesus says to them, take off the grave clothes, let him loose. I want you to understand something here. We started at John chapter 11, verse 1. And it wasn't until John chapter 11, verse 43 that Jesus did anything of significance. Pastor, why would you bring that up? Because I want us to understand God works in his timing, not ours. If God worked in our time, Martha would have said, Jesus, Lazarus is sick, and Jesus would have said, let me drop everything and go over. But what would have happened to the testimony? See, when things are happening to you and to me that don't make sense and don't seem fair and don't seem godly, and we sit down and go, God, where are you? Jesus, if you were only here. He is. He is. And he wants to show his glory through your situation. For 43 verses, no, I'm sorry, for 42 verses, he tells him what he's going to do, but he hasn't done anything. God tells us what he's going to do. He's going to save our souls. How many of you know if that's the only thing God ever did for you, that'd be pretty good? If you had to live in utter abject poverty with total illness, but you get to live in heaven forever afterwards, that's still not a bad deal. But we forget that. And the more affluent we are, the more stuff we have, the more we forget that. See, that's one of the biggest problems with Christianity in today. People are so self-sufficient they don't think they need Christianity because they're not looking past what they're doing today. How many of you know people who have so many toys that they don't know what to do with themselves? One of our people is pointing at their child. But we all have more toys than we need. That's why yesterday at church there was a yard sale and a flea market. And guess what? A lot of people got rid of a lot of extra. But when things go bad, oh God, if only you were here. He's there. He knows. He's ready to act. Maybe what we need to think about is, how's God going to work on this one? What is God going to do that's going to amaze me and astound me? Do you ever sit back and think about that? When I had cancer, well, I shouldn't say it. When I first had cancer, because I still do, my first thought was, God, I know you can heal me divinely. I also know you use doctors, nurses, time, and medicine, and I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. And every day I would pray. And most every day, I would follow the doctor's orders. And I thought it was good. I felt good. I felt strong. God's answering the prayer. And then I found out I had more tumors. Part of me went, God, where are you? And then I remembered a time back in 1993. My wife's raising her eyebrows. Yeah, we were married. It was when I cut 3 fingers off, and we sewed 2 of them back on. And I worked with my hands. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. And I said, God, I looked at him, and I can remember when I'm looking inside the fingers, and I know that's gross for some people, but I've done that. And I looked at him, and I said, God, this wasn't in my plan. What are you going to do about this? And that's what I honestly prayed. God, what are you going to do about this? And they sewed 2 of them back on. They're not right. There's a lot missing on them. They don't bend like they should or used to. But I'm grateful. But then in the morning when you wake up, how many of you wake up and ready to go?
No. I used to.
Get up and go, got up and went.
I understand it. Pastor Will calls that little bit of time between the time your brain wakes up and the time your eyes open. I call that twilight sleep. That's what I just named it. Okay? And I used to, in my twilight, say, God, I know that you can fix these fingers. I know that I can wake up and they'll look like they looked before the accident. Oh, man. And I prayed that for months. And I believed in my heart that God could. And I will tell you today, standing here almost 30 years later, I believe in my heart that if God could get glory out of putting this finger back together and stretching that one and stretching that one, He would. But He hasn't. And at that time in life, He didn't. Not that He can't. He just hasn't chosen to. But I will say this. As it came about, I went, Lord, okay, what are you going to do? If you're not going to fix the fingers, what are you going to do? did something that I never anticipated. He did something that I never expected. He did something that I never thought would happen in a million years. And he used this to open my eyes up to his strength and his power, and I became a minister.
Amen.
And almost 30 years later, guess what? I'm standing here in front of you. I wasn't contemplating ministry. I had a nice life. I had a decent job. My life was set. In fact, my wife told me, if you ever leave Cape May County, we're getting a divorce because I'm not leaving. And I ducked my call to ministry because I didn't want to leave my wife. The Lord worked on her heart and gave her something new and something exciting when she told me, hey, let's go to Colorado Springs. And I went, what? She says, that's where the Bible college is. For the Nazarene Church. And then I found out I didn't have to go there. I could take my courses another way, which I did. But here's what I want to understand. Sometimes, how does that tie into Lazarus? I had my life and plan set, and God disrupted it. And there were times I said, God, where are you? God, how does this work? And his bigger plan, his long-term plan. And I won't lie. There are times, and I know we're after time, but there were times, a few times, where I sat back and said, God, really? Why me? Not why me did this stuff happen. Why me as your minister? And then we had to sit back and say, okay, I'll trust God. I don't get it. And God, what I'm going to tell you is this. Trust God. Pray. Seek his face. And be amazed at what he does, but be open that it may not be what you think it is. Martha was content with Lazarus coming back at the end of time and resurrection. Jesus had a wholly different plan. Now sometimes, and I'm going to close with this, sometimes it's a miracle beyond miracles, but there can be some hardship to it. Anybody know what the hardship in this story is? Think about it a moment. Lazarus had to die again. Jesus brought him back, but then he had to face death again. But it did glorify God, not just for Martha, not just for Mary, obviously for Lazarus, but it also helped witness to all the people who saw it. Sometime, go ahead. And even today. We're still reading about it. Sometimes God uses these negative things to talk about Jesus. Can't tell you how many times I've talked about my fingers and about how God used it to move me where he wanted. And some kid comes up or some adult comes up and says, you know what? God's been talking to me about ministry and I haven't wanted to do it. Maybe I'll give it a shot. Or somebody says, you know, I'm going through a bad time. One time a girl came up to me and she said, I just did that. Will it be okay? Would you trust God and love God? If you read the Bible, if you ask him to take away your sin, yeah, it's going to work out fine. How will it work? And she said, I'm a music major. And I went, I don't know how it works. But God will take care of you, and she has. God has, and she's doing better. Dear Lord, as we read about Lazarus, as for 43 verses, you really didn't do anything. And you left us go through our human situation while you still had a bigger plan. Lord, help us to see that the services that we're having next week may very well have a bigger plan than just making us feel good. May very well have a bigger plan than just being able to say we've gone to services and been in your house and we've learned some of your word. Lord, help us to not wait to see our friends, our family, our loved ones, others at the resurrection. Lord, let us know that you want to give them life now as well as at the resurrection. We ask this in your holy and precious name. Amen. Amen.